Welcome, welcome, welcome everyone to the Improvly Speaking podcast. I'm so excited you're listening and joining today. On this podcast, we have three main goals. One, to help people understand the benefits of improvisation and applied improvisation. Two, to demonstrate how improv shows up in all aspects of our lives. And three, to inspire you to try new things, get out of your head and judgment zones, and find creative outlets and passions that can help you. And I'm so excited to be back today. And I say be back because I've been on a little hiatus from recording. I just moved from LA to Charlotte, North Carolina, and I recorded a solo episode, and I haven't been able to put out any other episodes. And now we're back. We've got some guest episodes coming up. And our guest today is an amazing improviser, applied improv facilitator, actor, and she's on my top 5 list of most organized people I know. And I do have that list. I really do have people on that list. And Jacque is one of them. So without further ado, let me tell you about our amazing guest today, Jacque Arend. Jacque Arend is a performer and educator who started out as a quote-unquote drama kid with Leo energy, and she discovered improv in 2005 through IO Chicago's Summer Intensive. In 2007, she co-founded the Torch Theater, which was Phoenix's first dedicated long-form space, while also managing the Phoenix Improv Festival, which helped hone her skills in operations, management, and organizational systems. Since 2010, Jacque has led applied improv workshops for major organizations, some of them you may have heard of, PepsiCo, JP Morgan Chase, Mayo Clinic, the FBI, and more. She is also an innovator in clinical improv or medical improv, partnering with Dr. Howard Silverman, the Dean of Curriculum at the University of Arizona. And she worked with a team of facilitators to design and deliver medical improv for first-year medical students. Jacque is a community builder at heart. She serves as managing director of Camp Improv Utopia, which I have had many guests on from camp, so I'm so excited to have Jacque now. She serves as associate artistic director and instructor at the Arizona Actors Academy, and she is also the executive director and co-founder of Savi Fest, which is Phoenix's newest improv festival. She continues to perform regularly at Second Beat Improv Theater and throughout the Valley with the Collaboratory. And I want to add one thing that's not listed on her bio, but I'm adding this. So I've gone to Camp Improv Utopia a few times, and every camp at the end of Camp Yosemite, when Jacque gets on to say her goodbyes and say thank yous, Jacque gets a standing ovation because she's so amazing and just plans and coordinates and manages the camp so well. She gets a standing ovation that goes, Jacque, 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 Jacque. So I'd like to invite you all to do the same right now. Please welcome the super talented, super busy, super duper organized Jacque Arend. Jacque, 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 Jacque.
Thank you for having me, Dana. This is a treat.
Oh, this is such a treat, Jacque. I'm so happy we're finally doing this. We've talked about doing this for a while. We were supposed to record in like April, May this year. And, life got in the way. My move happened or was starting to happen. But you know what? This is the perfect time to do it. The present time is the perfect time to do it.
That's right.
And so, Jacque, I mentioned it already. We met at Camp Improv Utopia, Yosemite Camp. I've attended Yosemite now 3 times, and then Camp West once. So I've been to camp 4 times. And I just absolutely love camp. I think half of the guests I've had on the podcast are from camp, or I've met from camp, or we have some kind of camp connection, which is great. And, I just salute you, and I'm so impressed by you, managing and organizing, coordinating a weekend-long camp-style improv camp for adults. I mean, that is a huge undertaking, and you do it with such grace. And I won't say ease because I know it's not, it's hard, but you make it look easy and graceful because I know there's a ton of planning behind the scenes. So I'm just curious. I've got kind of a behind the scenes question for you. Like, when do you start planning for camp? Is it almost as soon as camp happens, you like start planning for the next year?
Yeah, I think that there's a little degree of when things sort of come up each year that maybe need to be adjusted or improved, like the planning then begins, right? Like you're saying, okay, this needs to be stored somewhere so that we remember this in the next year. So I think in that regard, yes, it's ongoing and it's constantly evolving and building to the next season. But I would say about 2 months out is when from each camp individually, because there are right now about 4 that we try to run each year. So about 2 months out is when I'm like, oh no, I've got to get going. And yeah, you sort of, with each passing year, learn new tricks and tips for yourself in order to stay ahead of the game. Because I think inevitably, when you're building anything, it's hard to prepare for everything. And so there is sort of this constant feeling of being 2 weeks behind that you sort of have to go through until not only are you functioning with sort of a subconscious alert system, but so are the folks that are on your team as well, right? So the more and more folks go through it, the easier and easier it gets to logistically, right? I think with this particular year, we had 2 brand new camp facilities that we were working with. And that gets even more intense because you're, trying to learn everything that you can. But a lot of it is just sort of following the same methods that are working, trying to adapt new changes to continue to better it, and just trying to stay ahead of the game. I think a lot of effort and energy gets put into, just trying to be on top of everything. And the more people that you have with the knowledge, the better. I think that's the big lesson that I've learned in the last 3 years of being the managing director is, when you are starting to put that much information into the pile of what needs to happen, offloading as much of that information as possible is the best way to not drop any balls, hopefully.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm still laughing at your like feeling 2 weeks behind, that feeling that you have. And I think that anyone who plans any major event or any kind of event always feels like that kind of looming feeling. And I think, for me, I've talked about this in my previous solo episode, is that feeling of uncertainty. And I mean, for you as a planner, like you don't know, especially going into maybe a new campsite, there's always this level of uncertainty of like, how is the weekend going to go? Is the weather going to be good? Are the facilities going to be good? Is there going to be another camp that's going on at the same time that happened at Yosemite one time? Like a women's church camp was going on and we had to adjust and be flexible. And you can get caught up in the uncertainty of it and the anxiety of the uncertainty, but then trusting your skills that you've done this before, you have the experience, you have the knowledge, and you can adjust on the fly when you're there. So being as prepared as possible, and then also being like, I'm an improviser, things are going to come up, and we're going to handle them when things come up. And I could say that with like total confidence now, but I also understand sometimes I don't always have that confidence about uncertainty.
Yeah, I am a highly anxious person, and I think that the anxiety sort of rears its ugly head a lot in the preparation. I think folks who sort of deal with that are constantly chess playing with possibilities and sort of very sensitive to anything that may come up that they feel could be a problem. And I do that a lot, right? So I'm constantly sort of saying, how do we avoid this? How do we mitigate this? And doing as much of that as possible prior to each camp or event, in general, that I might have to, to work with, because otherwise I'll be anxious about the uncertainty, right? And you're right. You're absolutely right that the preparation that you do, for me at least, helps to minimize going into the weekends feeling anxious, which helps me to then over the weekend be prepared for anything. I am definitely one of those people who are completely off the charts and full on crisis mode about the littlest, tiniest thing. But when it's a big crisis, like double booking your camp weekend, I tend to be very cool and calm. And I think a lot of it has to do with the being in the moment thing, right? Because when you're in the moment working with stuff, you have no choice but to act, right? There's no time to think or consider. You just have to make the choices and keep moving forward. And so a lot of like the anxiety that one might feel in anticipation of uncertainty or intolerance of uncertainty is there's no time for it. It's not happening when you're in it. And there's no better way, I guess, to confirm your abilities and your capabilities and what you're doing than to be under fire. You know,
To really have that true test put on you, and you're like, yeah, I can handle things. I
yeah,
wish I didn't have to handle
right,
this, but I handled it. I
yeah,
did.
and with a smile. I mean, I think that's the
Right.
thing that always blows my mind, right? Is oh wow, I think that's the tough thing about being in leadership positions, right? Is people are looking to you in terms of how to perceive something. Like campers know this story, so I won't be, sharing anything that's not available for the public. But we did Camp Evolve for the first time this year, and we were at a new camp
Oh,
facility.
yeah.
And because of the limitations of the facility that we weren't quite privy to, we ran out of water on the last night. And so
Oh,
there was
no.
a lot of, and it's interesting because I really tried to hold on to that moment as best as I could as a memory, because I thought it was a really good representation of where I am now in terms of handling things like that. Immediately it's like people are coming to you like this is a problem. And rather than sort of getting all worked up about it, I was like, it's a problem we can fix. Let me seek to fix it. And just keeping myself composed through that before I sort of knew what are all the details. What does this really mean? What are we going to have to do? I think the hardest thing was sort of communicating to folks that we were going to be without water for 4 hours and, making sure that we're setting up a contingency plan, but, acknowledging in the moment that the best thing that we can do is be transparent. And we were greatly rewarded in that by the folks that were there. Wasn't like it was a good thing or something to celebrate, but it was a hard thing to share and a hard thing to hear. And so rather than everybody sitting in that unfortunate, news, they chose to cheer. And they cheered and yelled and hooped and hollered, which, for me and Wendy Penrod, who were co-directing that camp, it was the most supportive thing they could have done for us, right? Because it took a lot of that pressure off of us for having to deliver the hard information or the hard news. And, I think overall people were they were really pleased with us for just having just come forward, just been direct and to the point and letting us sort of have a conversation about all of the questions that we might have had about the, you know,
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
Never a dull moment in the leadership positions and roles that you take. And I'm sure you have plenty of those kind of stories, hopefully not like water related or facilities related, but just something's gone wrong. And I appreciate the behind the scenes because I think when I'm there over the weekend as a camper, I mean, I'm in my own little camper bubble and world, and I appreciate and I don't take for granted like the level of planning, but I also don't even understand the whole behind the scenes. So
Mm.
it was really fun to like connect with you and now have you on just to like kind of hear about the behind the scenes pieces. So I appreciate you sharing and then also stepping into that role because I've said this before and you'll hear me say it again probably, but there's a reason that you coordinate improv camps and there's a reason why I attend improv camps, right? And it's
Right.
because you can handle that level of planning and details and I choose not to.
Yeah, I think that the big thing, one other comment that just struck my mind about it is it is a lot of hard work, and can be tough for me sometimes to separate the purpose from the work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
or parcel it out to be able to understand it clearly, because I know that I am drawn to it, but it's hard and it's not without kicking and screaming at times. And the thing that I've always had a hard time with is accepting gratitude and compliments and understanding the impact, And so one of the things that I've been trying to do more of this year is, well, delegate more because that's also an issue that I have, which is,
For sure.
ultimately,
Yep. Feel that one. Yep.
suffocating my soul a little bit. But also just, yeah, the impact and like when people like yourself say how meaningful camp has been to them and how much it's opened up their world to other things, friends and opportunities. And, it's really easy for folks like myself, specifically to just sort of acknowledge what we do as being something that everyone does. And so it feels like the norm. Yeah, we all should be operating this way. This is just what I should be doing. This is what everyone does, right? And just being able to look at it from the perspective that everyone else does, which is no, this is a lot of hard work and not this, not the kind of hard work that everybody would be able to say yes to and or manage.
Yes to and manage and want to as
Yeah,
well.
right, right,
Yeah. Right.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And Jackie, we really jumped right in, and I want to just take a step back. And I ask everybody this question who comes on, and I'm really curious because I mean I've seen you in your director role, and then I just read your bio. You do so much on your website. You have 3 or 4 different kinds of bios depending on what role you are serving as. And so I'm curious, about your improv journey. Tell us about your improv journey, how you got started into it. How does Camp Improv Utopia fit into that? And take as long as you want. Regale us with your journey.
Sure. When I was 24, I was working in the service industry and I had been since I was 20. So it saw me through like waiting tables for Applebee's actually. So there's a plug
Ooh,
for
fun.
good old
So
the
a good
neighborhood.
improv scene location
That's
there.
right. That's right. Yeah, so I really that job waiting tables really saw me through my college experience, which got deterred. I was a film major and I had started in Michigan and I moved out to Arizona after my freshman year of college to live closer to my parents because they moved to Phoenix first. So I went from Southwest Michigan to Phoenix in 1999. And I just I got unfocused and I was sort of seeking belonging as well, which I couldn't really find in the film studies I was doing, but I found it in the theater community at a small community college called Scottsdale Community College out here. And I was getting a lot of support and validation and finding friends. And so I got confused and was like, F it all. And I dropped out of school. And I was like, I'm just having fun waiting tables and, doing that whole early 20s sort of lifestyle. And I worked with some really great people, but there were a lot of folks who were in their 40s or going into their 40s and there was a lot of jokes and conversations around being a lifer and sort of waiting tables your entire life. And I was like, oh gosh, I don't want that. No offense to
Oh
folks who do
no.
it because I completely understand
Right.
it's a great flexible lifestyle and easy money. And, I mean, it's hard work, but it's easy
Yes.
to go in and pick up a shift anytime and make the money you need, in that regard. So I was like, okay, well, I need to get back into creating in some way. If it's not going to be film, like, what is it going to be? What am I going to do? And I saw Shaun of the Dead, which is a movie by Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright. And I love the movie so much. I started looking into those guys and seeing what else they did. And they had a whole television series that they did 2 years in England. And I think what I loved about them was that they were a community of artists working in England and London that time that found each other and were just doing so much. I mean, Edgar and Simon went on to make 3 movies together. both have incredible careers now for it. And a lot of the folks that they collaborated with also are really great and talented and funny. And I was like, they found their tribe. Like, they're so lucky. They found their tribe and they found the wave and the flow, and they stuck with it. So I was like, well, I need to find my tribe. And so the first place I started with was improv comedy. I was looking for an excuse to go hang out in Chicago for a summer because I had high school friends that were living there, and I just wanted to spend a summer in Chicago because I never got to sort of do that as an adult. And I was like, okay, well, I'll take a second city class. And they had the summer intensive. And I was talking to a fella, his name is Dave Thurston, and he's a creative in Phoenix. He worked with me at the time, and I told him what I was doing, and he was like, "No, you need to go to the IO summer intensive. It's the same price, but it's 5 weeks instead of 1." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that makes more sense. That makes total sense to me. I can stay for a whole summer, and it's justified." I think I had made the decision that I would go back to school, get my associates in general studies so that I had something to show for my 4 years, and I got financial aid to help me pay for it. So,
Oh,
yeah,
smart.
it was the most brilliant thing I ever did in my life, and it didn't take me long to pay it back, so I feel really great about it. So I turned 25 that summer while I'm out there, but I do go, and I went, and the first day I had no idea what to expect. I had registered really early, like 6 months in advance. So my whole class was like all of the early birds, like the folks who were like, "Yes, I want to do this," like a year in
That
advance.
checks out. That checks out that you registered early. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, right, for sure. Yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, I think the first day that I walked into the space and got to work with the class, I talk about it as if it was like falling in love for the first time, like total love at first sight. After the first day, I was sold. I couldn't wait to go back. I got so into it. I spent more time at the improv theater watching shows and learning from the performers than I did with my friends that I went to go visit with. And before I even got back to Phoenix after that summer, I had already found teams that were performing to look up. I had already reached out to somebody who seemed to have an open doorway to joining their squad and got myself set up with an audition. I went back to Phoenix, and they were a medium form group, which meant that they did short form, but they sort of left room for like longer scene work. And so I went and auditioned with them, and I had a great audition. The folks that were already performing with this team, it was called The Originals, and Matt Rosine was the director, and he lives in Chicago now. He's an actor. Yeah, the audition went great, and I ended up getting put on the team. I think that at the time I remember sort of the long form being like, well, this isn't long form. Are you okay with that? And I was like, well, yeah, but my heart is always going to be where my heart is. So I did that for a little while, and yeah, I think, it was interesting being a part of that team because it was pretty obvious. And I've been thinking a lot about this recently that I sort of stepped into leadership roles in that squad, like within the first few months. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's just that. Well, let me just say that I recently got diagnosed with ADHD, which sort of explains a lot about a lot of my life because I think that it is that I get so like into something and then I want to know everything about it, right? I want to be involved in everything about it. Like I was raised Catholic and had a very strong Christian faith when I was a kid. And so I did these Catholic youth retreats. And like immediately after my first time doing it, I wanted to be on staff. So, and then when I was staff for one thing, I wanted to try staff for the next. And eventually I found my way all the way through all of the components of this youth retreat structure. And I was like, oh, right. Clearly that experience is contributing to everything I'm doing today in terms of
For
being an event
sure.
planner and a producer. Right. So started young. But anywho, yeah, so I was already, and like he needed a proxy to go represent for our team for the Phoenix Improv Festival planning. The folks that were doing it at that time were the long form improvisers. And they had been running this festival for 5 years already, going into their 6th year. And they were trying to get other teams and other improvisers in the Valley more involved. And I was like, yeah, I'll go do it. And I remember walking in, and this goes back to the uncertainty, right? I had no idea who these people were, never met them. I felt total fish out of water. And I went in and I just sat in these meetings for probably a good 3 months before I started talking, you know? Like, just observing, just taking it all in, just getting to know them, getting to know their process, getting to know their product until, like, I was at the point where I felt comfortable or confident taking things or taking ownership or speaking my
Wow,
mind, that sort
nice.
of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I'm just sort of rolling on up, and by getting involved in the Phoenix Improv Festival, I ended up getting involved in the co-founding group of the Torch Theater. It's also why I started teaching right away. Like went to the training in 2005. I started playing right away when I got back to Phoenix, and then by 2007, they were just like, "We need teachers." So I was like, "Let's do it. Let's go
Of
ahead." I
course,
know
you're
that
like, "I'm here. I'm in."
like,
Yes.
yeah, I don't know if you've noticed, but I'll say yes to everything. And yeah, I think for the first couple of years from 2006, some of these folks invited me to go to LA to sit in with their team to play in the LA festival. And so I got to sort of know a lot of IO West folks and get to know those people. IO West folks were coming out, and this would be like Nick Armstrong, Craig Gakowski, Jessica Young, just a lot of folks that we know at camp as well. And they would come out to our festivals every year too. So I would learn from the workshops that Bill was bringing in. Bill Binder's the name of the guy who ran the festival back then. But yeah, and I would just eat up as many workshops as I could. I would try to watch as many shows as I could. I ate, slept, and drank improv for a long time, and it ended up
Sounds like
changing.
it.
It changed the trajectory of my life because where I was sort of partying a lot and hanging out with a lot of my server friends. Now I was spending my weekends driving to downtown Phoenix. I lived in Tempe at the time, which is where ASU is, but it's just like a 20-minute drive on the highway. Anyway, so yeah, so I started. And then, of course, you're making new friends and you're building out that way. And I got picked out for some teams, started some long form teams that are still sort of exist but aren't necessarily playing, and yeah, sort of dove into the idea of building a theater with these folks. And a lot of it was learning, right? Because I'd never done anything like that before. Like, you had to do curriculum building, you had to create systems and infrastructure, and a lot of things that other folks didn't have the time or the know-how or the ability at the time to do. I was like, I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll figure it out. I'll do it. And so I was just sort of teaching myself all kinds of skill sets to be able to be or to feel capable within running a theater and running a festival and all of the stuff that there was to learn. And I was on that path for, I'd say, 10 years, from 2007 all the way through my 30s into 2017. And eventually it built into managing the website, and then learning how to do graphics, but I was running the registrations and the administration for the training center. And at a certain point, I was like, I don't want to be waiting tables anymore. So you sort of get to that point where you have the conversation of, can I make this a full-time gig? And, or, do I have to keep waiting or do I have to start, focusing elsewhere?
I was gonna say, you're still waiting tables all throughout that journey piece. Okay, so then you came to that
Yeah.
point, like, kinda
So
came to a head, like, "Can I move away from that?" Yeah.
yeah, and I'll back up to 2011 or 2010 at our festival. I was the hospitality director at that time. So I was like helping out of town performers get to the hotel, find the rooms, making sure they had rides from the airport, because this was way back before we created our own Uber system, essentially, with a Den parent system that we had. And Nick Armstrong yells at me down the hallway. He says, "Jackie, you won't have to run around like this at camp." And I was like, I'm sold. Because that was the first time he was marketing Camp Improv Utopia, was at our festival. And I had looked at a
Oh.
flyer, and then he said, "Hey, you don't have to run around like this." And I was like, "Yep, totally, count me in." He says I handed him a check the next day. I thought I mailed it to him, but either way, it doesn't matter. I was the very first camper ever for Improv Utopia.
Really? I
Yeah,
didn't
and
know that.
and I had a great time being just a camper, but in true Jackie form, before the next year, I was like, I want to be staff. And in fact, the first few years of Improv Utopia, I counseled for 2 years. And then I took a break because I'd gotten married in 2012 to my husband, who I met through improv. And that's a whole nother story for another podcast. But we we just got married, so I think there was a lot of focus on sort of saving money for whatever the married life brought. So I took a little break, but when he opened or launched Improv Utopia East, which was in 2015, he asked if I wanted to be the admin, if I wanted to help with the admin, and I would get to go for free, right? It was sort of a staff exchange. And I was like, yeah, totally, no problem. I'll do the admin, right? So that was the first time like I dabbled in admin for another organization outside of the Torch, and sort of gave my skill sets to Improv Utopia, which sort of helped me learn how other systems are working and sort of combine that with the stuff that I was already using. So like, when you sort of pile on all kinds of organizations where you're sort of giving your same expertise of, let's say, administrative services, it's so interesting how many little learning points you go through that then just contribute back around to the other things that you're doing. And so I think stacking a lot of my collaborations was a huge point to me diversifying my portfolio in terms of my skill sets. But I think the next year he added Yosemite, and he sort of needed help just doing the admin for it. So I sort of set up that first year, and then he hired an admin after that, but it didn't work out. And he needed, in a pinch, he needed a new admin. And it was at the time that I was going through this shift of like, how do I make more money? How do I get out of serving? And I was like, yes, I'll take it. I'll take the job. I'm down. So that was in 2017, I think, that I started the admin position. It wasn't full time. It was even less than, like it was about 20 hours a month at most, maybe. So it was a real small time gig, but it was a really great way to support Improv Utopia, and sort of allowed me the opportunity for a few years to just go to camp and enjoy camp as a camper, which I took great advantage of. Also, when I got that situation with Improv Utopia and sort of got in the gate there on a more back end level, I also got invited or asked, well, a lot of my gigs come serendipitously. I'm not necessarily going out and seeking them, but maybe I am saying to the universe, like, I need more money, and the universe has always provided for me my entire life. So I know that there's, I can have a little faith in that. So I think I was just sort of kind of calling out, like, I'm ready. I have open doors for this. And that's when the owner, Brandy Hotchner, and artistic director of Arizona Actors Academy, wanted to offer improv to our acting students, and came to me and asked me if I would create a program for them. So I said yes, and started teaching for her. And it was a complement to the acting program. So it was really interesting to now take all my skill sets and everything I knew and apply it in a different way, to actors, focusing on what the skill sets that they needed, and to build a curriculum that supported her structure, so it was sort of stepping out of like traditional improv curriculum styles and thinking, oh, how can I do this as an open door revolving class where people can come and go as they please? And that was really a great exercise. And that's evolved, and I still work for her. But at some point while I was doing that gig, she sort of lost her admin support. And I was like, hey, I can help you. And here are all the ways that I can see that I can help you. And so I tacked that job on at that time as well, around 2017. And so now I'm just sort of picking up what I would say a bunch of, small-time, part-time gigs that are kind of contributing to an income supplement, which gave me the courage in 2017 at the end of it to leave my serving gig.
Woo!
Yeah.
That's inspiration for those listening. Like, we're always kind of on that cusp. We're like, oh, I really want to make this happen. Like, it's a journey, right?
Yeah.
And when it's time.
Yeah, for sure. I also, during that time, started teaching applied improvisation through the Torch Theater. And again, that was mainly just because at the time, folks were coming to us with them, and we needed somebody to field them and to manage them, project manage them. And, I think that the thing at the time with the Torch was whoever's going to project manage them might as well be facilitating them as well, so that they can reap the rewards of doing it, And so I started sort of teaching applied improv in 2010 as a support instructor. And then in 2012, I took over the full program. And I would say over time, you really build those skill sets. And I think that's the same. I think applied improv is a really great example of building the skill sets in general for things that you're learning that are brand new, as well as, when to understand when to start teaching. I have a really interesting philosophy about teaching that doesn't necessarily always mirror everyone else's, because some folks feel like people have to kind of build certain sensibilities before they start teaching. And I agree that you should have the right intentions with why you're teaching. And that's the thing that you hone by being in environments that have a culture that supports that, the care and psychological safety, which is a word I got from you, by the way, or vocabulary that I learned from you. Of creating the right environment and the right culture for improvisation is so super important. So when sometimes I think that we kind of feel like, oh, that person should be teaching, I think ultimately what we're really reflecting on is that maybe they're not quite ready to create the safe spaces that are necessary. But with all things that are new, you have to start somewhere, right? And if you have an inclination towards it, then you're driven to it, right? You're called to it. You have a need and a want to pass on the information that you know. And I think that people can start doing that as soon as they feel confident enough to do it, right? Like when teams and stuff self-coach and that sort of thing, they can coach each other. They can bring exercises and try them out on each other. I think where it gets difficult is giving notes that you can't back up with articulation, right? If you can't necessarily explain to somebody why what they're doing is wrong, then we may not be ready to give that note, I think, and I think that's the thing, is that ultimately when you first start doing it, all people really want is facilitation and guidance through the practice. So you might spit, like, having started teaching probably long before anybody would have deemed me ready, right? Only being 2 years as a performer, 2 years of having taken workshops and sought guidance and that sort of thing. I knew that I wasn't ready to give notes. And every time I tried to give notes, I kept thinking, what is this nonsense coming out of my mouth, right? I couldn't articulate what I was trying to express, or why a note needed to be given. And it can be very tough those times. And I think in anything, when you're learning and making mistakes and you're feeling weird about how you're showing up, it's like those are the learning and growth moments. Those are the things that you have to sort of step through in order to get to the other side and show up at the next level. And unfortunately, with teaching and facilitating, like, you've got to start somewhere, like being a parent is another really great example, right? People say, oh, I'm not ready to be a parent. You're never going to be ready to be a parent, right? Going back to us talking about the anxiety of anticipating uncertainty, parenting is like the best example of, you can prepare and you can read and you can, know as much as you think you want to know, but until you're in it, until you're, experiencing it, you're not going to feel ready, right? Like, feeling ready and being ready, I think, are two very different things. I think being ready is just sort of knowing that we're having that little fire in your chest that says, I want to do this,
I love that.
So anywho, so getting back on the story. Yeah. So I grew into confidence with everything, I think, like, just over time, even being a performer, I remember sort of that 3-year marker and that 5-year marker. Like, the 3-year marker as a performer was like, oh yeah, I'm consistent enough to walk away enjoying it every time. And I feel consistent enough to be able to say, why didn't I enjoy that moment? And then be able to identify what I should have done differently, or what maybe could have helped better connection in that moment. 5 years was about the time as a performer where I can see the whole picture, where I can step away from, like, oh, just being in the moment, being present and thinking about how does this moment plug into the last moment, or where we're heading, which is all long form technique, right? Of sort of being in the moment while also imagining how it impacts the whole or the outcome.
Yeah. I love that 3-year and 5-year marker, because I haven't heard that term, but I like it because I've always struggled a little bit, like, as a newbie improviser. And a lot of my improv journey was online, because I started almost like right before COVID, and then it all went online with COVID. And I feel like I was a bit delayed in, like, the in-person performances, but I feel like with the 1 or 2 year markers, like everything's just kind of challenging, and you get up there and it just feels like you kind of bomb, and you can't really articulate why it bombed. It just didn't feel very good. And so I like that like 3 year marker, you're like, oh, I feel better about that. Like I feel good. And then the 5 year marker, you like zoom out and you can see the whole picture, or you say, maybe I didn't like that, but I still had fun. Like it's fun to kind of see how the markers go in your journey as an improv performer too. So anyway, I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think that could be related to any new thing anybody tries to step into, right? 3 years of doing something consistently is going to give you a feeling of normalcy, right? Like I belong here. 5 years of normal consistency is a level up. It's a major level up to like, okay, how do I now challenge myself in this? So yeah, speaking of COVID, so in 2017, when I stepped away, we were going through some challenges in our own community, and it was really hard and it was very heartbreaking. And there were also some things that sort of happened to me individually in terms of like where I was heading, where I was aiming, right? My anxiety was getting worse. I was feeling a lot of burden of responsibility. Like, I think, the challenge is now we're 10 years in, and I've sort of created all of these things for myself that now then feel like like my responsibility. And I was having a hard
Ah,
time
big
managing all that.
burden.
Yeah. And in 2017, I had come across an old friend that I see maybe once a year. And this is a camp friend. So, you know how those camp friends can go sometimes, right? Like you check in and you ask, how are things going? And I painfully said to them or told them how things were going. And they painfully said back to me, this sounds exactly like where you were last year. And it was a major eye-opening, and this has happened multiple times in my life where people have told me, "You've done no progress in the last year," because this is exactly what we said, and I find those as very delightful moments of reckoning, as hard as it may be, to sort of
Good
come up against.
friends. Yeah.
Yeah, to come up against somebody who tells you that you're starting to sound like a broken record. And that was, the catalyst for me having the courage to make some change. And I was ruminating about it the summer of 2017. And I remember I went to the Del Close Marathon with the foundation as the team that we called our collective members that made up the board at the Torch Theater. And so we went to Del Close Marathon, and we went to the after party just to see how it was, like the party space. And it was during the day, and we were just hanging out on the balcony, and Peter Serafinowicz was standing next to me. And so going back to the Shaun of the Dead conversation, Peter Serafinowicz was in that sort of cohort of folks that were working together with Simon and Edgar at the time. And so I knew him, and I knew him well. And I was like in total, like, oh, what do I do? What do I do? Do I say hello?
Fangirl moment.
I asked myself at that moment, I was like, which action are you going to be happier with? Saying something or not saying something? So I made the choice to say something. It was awkward and wonderful. And just having had that experience lit me up, like for the first time in a long time, because I think anxiety creates a lot of shame and guilt sometimes. And that sort of creates a lot of low vibration and, a lot of, depressive feelings. Right. And so it was the first time in a long time that I felt alive, like this is what it means to feel alive. Like nothing could stop my good time. I was open to everything. I was happy and full of life and felt lighter than I felt light, like I felt like I was floating,
Amazing.
and I thought, this is what life should be like this, like I should not have to meet Peter Serafinowicz to feel this way, like what a travesty that I have to meet somebody, a celebrity, to feel alive. Like I'm not gonna let that happen. And that was actually what gave me the courage to start making change. That's what led to ending my job. And I think a lot of what like sort of got me to the point of feeling that way in the first place was that I was sort of coming to the conclusion that the situation that I was in was not going to provide for me. Like all the work and the sweat equity that I put in to build this thing was never going to provide for me. And it's a really heartbreaking, thing to come to realize that you have to walk away from something you truly loved.
Is that the theater? Building the
Yeah, the
yeah,
Torch Theater.
okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah, I can imagine the
Yes.
sweat equity is a good word for
Yeah.
it, yeah, yeah, I can
And,
hear the, like, heartbreak in your voice too.
yeah, and the
Yeah.
sweat equity was education, and I knew it to be that, so I never questioned it, but at some point, you think, "Okay, there's gotta be a next level here," right? And it affected my worth, my self-worth, because if I'm not sort of getting what I think I deserve, then I'm gonna start to believe maybe I don't deserve that, right? Um, and so, yeah, so I sorta had to walk away, and I think the thing that sucked about it was that because it was such a big deal, it was a breakup with all of improv. It wasn't just associated or tied to the torch, it was tied to all of it. It was tied to everything that for 10 years of my life was my reason for living. And I'm not exaggerating that. It was my passion, I loved it dearly. So yeah, it was really hard. And so I was like, well, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to like think on the bright side. And that's when I started taking acting classes and sort of returning to that interest of wanting to be maybe a serious actor, and which is something that I never pursued because I never believed it. I never believed it was possible. But a lot of my compliments as a performer was my believability, right? So I'm like, okay, well, it is my acting that sort of sets me apart in a lot of ways. And my boss at the acting school was really encouraging me because she saw in me a lot of truth and vulnerability that I brought to my work, which is sort of what Arizona Actors Academy deems as being the necessary part of our art form. And so yeah, so I dove into that, and that was a lot of, there was some comedy, but it's a lot of serious work. I mean, you really are sort of asking yourself to step into a lot of the darkness of humanity to really spread or stretch your vulnerability, to stretch your versatility and your emotional range. And so when you dive into that as an actor, you sort of get really hungry for all of it. And I think that's the thing that sort of broke me open in terms of sort of understanding or allowing myself to really truly be my full self in relationship to my sensitivities and understanding myself as an empathetic human being. It's not necessarily something that I thought a lot about. I was told a lot that I was too sensitive about a lot of things, right? And there
Like, as a kid or as an
uh,
adult?
kid, adult, my entire
Like
life. Yeah. And this
oh,
is the ADHD stuff, right?
yeah.
As an ADHD child, I did have increased sensitivities emotionally. And a thing that's a little bit of a bummer about growing up in the 80s as a girl who's high functioning, ADHD, I created coping mechanisms without people noticing. I learned how to mask without people sort of noticing that that's was happening, right? In their mind, they're thinking, "Oh, I'm just getting better at behaving." you know? But no, I'm actually teaching myself skill sets in order to behave normally, right? And so a lot of that is, trying to create emotional deregulation, but the challenge is that if you're sort of considered to be overly sensitive or too emotional, then nobody's taking it seriously what kind of deregulation tactics you need, right? And I think, the unfortunate thing is that a lot of women who are experiencing this sort of diagnosis in their later years weren't really necessarily given the support that they needed to work that out. So they did a lot of it on their own, which leads you to then growing up feeling like you have to do everything yourself.
And you weren't diagnosed until you were an adult, right?
Yeah,
So you
June of this year. So I just turned
oh, this
46 this summer.
oh,
Yeah.
oh, so that
Yeah.
just happened. Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So thinking back now that I'm talking about this time in 2017 where I was sort of breaking down, I think what was happening was a lot of my coping mechanisms. I was generating too much overwhelm for myself. that was paralyzing me, and I didn't know that at the time, so I thought, of course, that there's something wrong, on a deeper scale, right? But if I had had the skills then I would have been able to recognize what was going on. What ended up happening was I dropped everything, and then I've slowly been piling and stacking things back on, and sort of putting the operations manager for Improv Utopia on my plate back in, well, I sort of started helping out a lot operationally in 2021, and then I got the title in 2023. But this is about the time that I'm 43 years old, and suddenly I am incapable of functioning completely. Everything broke down. None of my systems were working because, like, I sort of rebuilt new systems as I started to rebuild my revenue streams. I was building websites, and yeah, I was taking in a lot of contractor money. And so when I had to do all of this organizational and structural work, infrastructure work, which is stuff that I do every day, it felt harder. It just felt more difficult. And where I was struggling was to just initiate. Like I was just having trouble just making the choice to do anything. And folks kept telling me, "You're in perimenopause. It's perimenopause. You're going through hormonal shifts." And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, okay. I'll take that into consideration. I'll keep an eye out for perimenopausal stuff and that sort of thing." And 43 is sort of a common time for it to start with women. And perimenopause is the preparation for menopause, and it's when your body starts changing how it's releasing hormones. And what happens is that phase right before the menstrual phase they call it now the luteal phase. Like now we have language for all of this, which makes it so much easier to understand. So during that premenstrual, we used to call it premenstrual, the luteal phase, your progesterone drops. And whatever little dopamine your ADHD mind was creating for you has now gone to nothing. And if you don't have skills, to help you with the dopamine, or if you're not medicated, it can be absolutely crushing. And so for 3 days, you have absolutely no focus. You're incapable of taking action on any thoughts. And if you don't know that this is what's happening, if you don't know that this is the pattern of your cycle, then the only thing that's happening inside of your brain is what's wrong with me. You know,
Hmm.
why
Yeah,
can't I?
that constant chatter, that brain
Mhm.
chatter,
Yep.
negative chatter
Very
too.
negative chatter, yeah, and I think that because I didn't take it seriously enough and I assumed it was state of being because of circumstances and that sort of thing, I just kept trudging through it, and I ended up slipping into a depression. So, yeah, I just kept going through the pattern over and over, and,
Every
you're
month? Yeah.
yeah, every month, and sometimes you can't catch up, like, sometimes I
Uh-huh.
it would be so devastating. By the time I came out of it, there would be so much overwhelm that it would shut me down for a whole 'nother week, right? So I would maybe only
Right.
have 1 good week a month where I could, like, actually feel focused enough to yeah, to be on point. And,
Mhm.
yeah, I think that, like, falling into the depression was as hard as it was and for as low as it got. I think that I mean, I got out of it, like, I had my defining moment, which, sort of, allowed my child or inner self say, "This is not who we are. Come on, big Jackie.
Mhm.
Let's go. Let's fix this problem." There is sort of I think that you go through this process of trying to reframe the inner voices, right? For sure. One thing, the first things first, let's take care of the negativity because
Mhm.
they're not real, right? They're not at all reflecting the truth, right? But
Yeah.
I think the challenge with neurodivergence is sometimes, it's hard to identify that.
Yeah. Give yourself that grace.
Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. And so I sort of sought help. My first step was sort of therapy because I was like, I have a lot to talk about. like a daily step is just talk about a lot of things. And I think that once I started feeling better, like happier and healthier mentally, I was still having trouble working. I was still going through the patterns and I was like, why this should be fixed. These
Yeah.
things shouldn't be happening anymore.
Should,
Yeah,
right?
right. And then I was like, you know what? I think it's ADHD. I just don't know what else it could possibly be. Like all the things that I'm experiencing are factually, on this sheet. And so I pursued an evaluation, and then when I got the diagnosis, I went on medication right away. I've never chose medication for pain or anxiety or opioids necessarily that I've seen people abuse throughout my life. I've always been good about that, but because I do have an addictive personality and an obsessive personality, which are also symptoms, but I just was like, yeah, I mean, I didn't feel like I was strong enough to fix these things through practice, you know?
I don't know if it's even strength based. I mean, sometimes you need that. It's like cognitive, like something in your brain, like the dopamine release or decrease too, is affecting it, and you need some help too. And maybe all the strategies in the world still wouldn't be able to help that chemical imbalance.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I just wanted, desperately to feel like a normal functioning person again after having been so long. And I immediately, after my first day, my first week or whatever, I immediately had, I'd say, 80% less anxiety.
Mm, yeah.
And the voices didn't hold any power on me anymore. And I think that the process of sort of building good systems for me to function is still ongoing, you know, but I can have a lot more grace for myself in it, you know?
And the medication that happened in June, right? Is that this year? Yeah.
No.
So, I mean, you say you're high functioning. I mean, clearly, 'cause, I mean, you organized all these camps, and yet, like, you're having like weeks out of each month that you were struggling to function. I mean, that's just blowing my mind, like the masks and like the shields that we wear, and you just assume like, oh well, I mean, Jackie's doing great, like just organize this camp and like just put on this huge event, or take it on a festival and this other gig work, and it's behind the scenes, or even like taking off masks. There's a lot going on, and so we can never
Yeah.
assume what anyone's going through,
Right.
right?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting too, sort of recognizing that, oh, I have a flow in bursts. And so like a lot of what's kept me going is that every time I have had a flow state, I work for 3 days straight, like morning to
Ah,
night, you know?
I
And
can't stop because sometimes if it stops, it stops. Yeah. So
yeah,
that flow
right.
state kept you going.
Oh, and something relating back to the tolerance for uncertainty and sort of dealing with uncertainty is like they say with ADHD, because of that reason, because of that thing, there's unpredictability in terms of how you're going to show up. Like they have this joke that ADHD folk don't want to make plans for a month from now because they have no idea how they'll feel that day. you know?
Yeah.
So there's almost sort of this, uncertainty built into your life that you're dealing with and coping with daily, right? Yeah, it's crazy. And funny enough, my therapist had told me that I probably gravitate towards improv because it's a place where you have to be present
Ah.
because it's so hard to
Um,
be present otherwise. And it's like it's a built-in sort of space that's the game. The game is to go in and be present.
because otherwise you spin your wheels, analysis paralysis. I mean, just like constantly overthinking or like thinking about all kinds of different things. But when you step into the improv room or the stage, you can kind of release that. Yeah.
Yeah, you have more intention on focus, right? Like you're
Yeah.
actively saying, I'm going to be focused in this moment. You're less likely to get distracted because I think also, aside from even just the complexities in which the brain works, as an ADHD person, I might hear I might be in a deep conversation with you, hear a noise that I don't identify, and I'm pulled out completely. Like my
Mm.
brain almost sort of leaves my head and tries to go find the noise in order to justify the noise. And it won't be satisfied until it knows, because anything that doesn't have sense or logic is sort of like a broken cog in the working wheels.
How do you think this now diagnoses that would have helped to have happened earlier, but now you have it? eh, How do you think that serves you in the work that you do now and recognizing, what others can go through and all the different kind of brain types that step into an improv festival or camp or facility or
You,
applied
you,
improv too, the applied improv world as well?
yeah, you mean in terms of being a leader in those environments?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously neurodiversity offers a lot of benefit to complex systems. I think one of the challenges that I'm having in my perimenopausal stage of life is that I can't hold as many complex systems. But before I sort of took this turn where my dopamine even got less, I was able to hold all the complex systems in my brain. Like age is really having an impact on that, but I think that's normal, right? Like ultimately, I shouldn't be holding a whole calendar in my mind, but all the way up through my
That's why they
30s,
make calendars. Yeah.
yeah, up through
I'm
my
right there
30s,
with you though.
I didn't have to have a calendar. I had
Mhm.
everything in my brain. I kept things in lists on paper, and that helped plug it into my brain capacity for keeping all of that information. Yeah, so I think that there's just, and I get a lot of compliments about how well I'm able to use my left and my right brain. And I think that that's a neurotypical benefit as well, right? You're accessing capabilities that are a lot of, I'm not necessarily great at math, but I'm great at sort of systems and logic and engineering sort of complexities. And then I'm also very creative, because I think above all else, above everything else that I do, I identify as an artist. I mean, at my core, that's what and who I am, you know. And I never really understood that, because again, when you don't know that you're neurotypical, you just believe that everybody is this way, right? You just believe that
Mhm.
this is the normal, and so what I'm doing is the standard. And I remember working in the service industry, and I was a trainer there, so I went into leadership roles there too. They invited me to be a manager, but I found, luckily, I probably would have taken it, except that I found improv first, and I was like, no, I'm going to spend all that time improvising. But when I was a like a manager, like a shift leader at in the service industry, I always had high expectations of my coworkers, to
Yeah.
know everything that they were responsible for, to keep up with it, to meet the expectations, so to speak. And few people did, right? Because
Okay.
server jobs just tend to attract, folks who are just going to come in and do the bare minimum, which is totally fine. I mean, I think
We're
that's just
just
the
in
nature.
a stage of life too
Exactly.
that, yeah, brings kind of that this isn't permanent job,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
I constantly had to be told that I had to lower my expectations, and my managers telling me that I exceed expectations. And so my level of standard is higher than what I'm going to get out of most people, and that sort of thing. And that always seems so strange to me, but I think that maybe if I had known that I was high functioning ADHD, then maybe I would have understood that a little bit better, because one of the things about neurodivergent brains is you have attachments to justice and fairness, and you're told this is the way it should be, and then you're like, yes, that's the way it should be for everyone. you know Above all else, right?
Right.
You get sort of really rigid in laws and expectations and requirements and a lot of that stuff. So anywho, I think that, like, I had to sort of scale back what I would expect of others. I think, what ended up happening, like when I went into leadership roles, what ended up happening was the teeter totter of it, which was like, I'm going to expect and always be grateful for what they're able to give, but I'm going to be prepared to do it all. you know,
Oh,
um,
yeah.
which just helps mitigate disappointment. It helps ensure that there's accountability, but it does sort of, and what it definitely did to me was sort of create this illusion that I was responsible for everything or that nothing would get done without me, right? And then the
Mhm.
burden that that bears. And I think that for folks who are coming into it, I think at the start, at the onset of things, building systems of communications that make it easy for everyone to be informed, bringing people in at certain levels to help support projects, delegating from the very beginning versus sort of charging ahead with this I'll do it all mentality and then worrying about delegating later. Because I think it's much harder to delegate later after you've, sort of built everything.
Do you ever use the word burnout in your journey too? Would you say, because you say like the burden of overwhelm? I mean, do you feel like that was burnout too? Just because like in talking about your journey, I say this sometimes in my workshops of like when we're talking about yes and, I always try to clarify with people like yes and does not mean saying yes and to everything. No is a complete sense. Have your boundaries, but hearing your journey, it does sound like you said yes and to a lot of things and then felt that burden of overwhelm. I don't know, do you label it as burnout or is it there were more things at play too at the time?
I think a lot of people have called it burnout when I've sought advice and counsel. I don't know if I've ever accepted fully the burnout. And we talk about burnout in the Med Improv program that I do too, because it's really easy for doctors to get burnt out if they're not giving themselves enough self care. But yeah, for whatever reason, I don't talk about this enough. And a lot of it, I'm glad that I said the word self care because a lot of it was sort of putting myself above all else, or not putting myself above all else, right? Making everything else more important than me. And also
Right.
the sort of commitment to what I said I would do. If I took something on, I wanted to see it through, even if it was painful,
Yeah.
which as
Mhm.
with ADHD, tasks feel very painful. Yeah, burnout is real, and I think the big thing is, yeah, knowing where, boundaries are very important, so coming in it from the beginning of knowing what your boundaries are. I think the challenge with me is that I was so in love with it when I first started, I didn't have any boundaries, I wasn't on my way to any sort of career, so to me, this was the closest I had, and so it felt like it needed to not have boundaries in a way.
I have to do all the things for everyone in order to be accepted, right?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, and I think that taking that break in 2017 and pulling back from a bunch of stuff was me taking that care. And in fact, from 2017 to 2019, I only did things that pleased me, right? I said no a lot to things. I had to go through the sort of the discomfort of setting those boundaries and sort of the FOMO and sort of I
Mhm.
worried a lot about my connections and how people would feel about me or think about me. But when 2020 came along, there's this sort of strange thing happened, which was like, the acting that I was pursuing and I was doing real well with had to go on like I just got an agent in January of 2020, right? So I just sort of
Oh,
set myself
man.
up to needle in even more. I got cast in a play by a local theater that does public performances for the Valley, and that was very gratifying. And
Yeah.
I thought, okay, we're going to do more of this stuff. And 2020 happened. And I think that I had sort of just come off of this period of time of not having any expectations, not having any desires or goals, even just sort of saying, okay, I'm just going to live each day as I want to. And sort of, really I was trying to reset my nervous system because my anxiety had gotten so
Mhm.
bad. It was throughout my entire body. And I didn't know the conversations around nervous system at the time to recognize that's what I was doing. I just knew I needed a reset. So going into the pandemic was not scary to me in regards to having to shut things down and what does this mean about my job or what I'm going to do every day. I was already doing that stuff.
Yeah.
So the fears more so were with what does this mean and what's going to happen to all of us,
Yeah, very uncertain times for
The
sure.
businesses that I was supporting, which was at the time just Improv Utopia and AZAA, needed a lot of support, right? For communications, restructuring, shuffling, whatever it ended up being, right? For Improv Utopia, it was canceling and refunding and, going through the process of figuring out if people wanted to credit till we come back, and managing all that information. For Arizona Actors Academy, it was completely shifting over to Zoom. And on top of that, maintaining a positive platform in which to communicate all this from and pumping out to these folks that we were going to be okay and us being okay means we're all going to be okay. And it was easy. It ended up being outside of just, sort of existential doom and gloom. The work was easy because of that crisis thing I talked about. We are in a crisis and I am the right person for the job because I have to stay present in every moment and just take action. There's no time to question, am I getting enough dopamine? But also too, how this light bulb moment, the crisis might just be providing dopamine, right? Because the crisis is creating adrenaline. The adrenaline's creating dopamine and everything feels okay.
Well,
Which is
can
a
you imagine
bizarre
if
way to look
you
at it.
I just think, can you imagine if you didn't have that 2 years of kind of reset,
For sure.
Like, I think you come into the pandemic as a different person, and handling it a lot differently. I mean,
Yeah.
it's easy to look back now, but in the moment, and yeah, we've done a lot of reflection since then, but just hearing your journey is, you had poised yourself to be able to handle that moment, at
Yes,
least.
thank you for bringing that up because in the crazy spiritual sort of approach to all of this life, it was not lost on me that I was preparing for something. Especially when it happened, it was easy to look back and be like, "Oh my gosh, like I set myself up for this, like without even
Mhm.
knowing it." Like another strange thing that happened in 2019, in November of 2019, I suddenly decided I wanted to learn how to cook. I hated cooking, hated the kitchen. And for
How'd
whatever
that go?
strange reason, well, I did HelloFresh for like 5 months before the pandemic started. So by the time the pandemic started, I was like, "Oh, I can meal prep. Like, I can
Yeah.
go to the grocery store and buy meat and veggies and starch for
Yeah.
meals, and I can cook it without killing us. This is great." Yeah, it was wild. Yeah,
Do
so
you still like
2000
to cook?
Yeah, I still cook. Cooking is a whole nother thing because it's like when you have the space for it, it's great. And even when you don't have the space for it, it can sometimes be an incredible reset because again, cooking something that requires you to be in the moment, right? You don't have time to get distracted, get lost, right? So I often found it, especially during the pandemic, to be a nice reset of my nervous system because it was a moment where I had to be present with this thing and not sort of holding or carrying all of these other things. But I do find that burden of meal planning. I give a lot of props to moms and dads who do the work of making sure that their family gets fed every night. I mean, it's another big task that requires leadership, right? Because
Mhm.
you're making the decisions for a whole tribe of people and you're trying to do it in a way that's interesting and easy on you from time to time, right?
Jackie, I relate a lot to your story. I mean, I'm going through my own journey as a mom, so maybe not the ADHD diagnosis, but definitely, like, brain changes in the past 2 years, and I was also one who, like, prided myself on not needing a calendar. I'm like, "I know what I'm doing tomorrow, I know what's coming next Saturday, like, I don't need a calendar." And yes, for, like, work meetings and stuff, but, like, even then, I knew what was coming the next day, and then now as a mom, I'm like, "If I don't have my calendar, I'm gonna double book myself, I'm gonna miss something." And my brain has definitely gone through changes, and it's been hard to see and feel that. and also then give myself grace, and I haven't wanted to cook. Like, I haven't had the capacity, like, the brain capacity,
Mm.
the energy. Anyway, and so just you sharing your story, your journey, I think is so relatable. I mean, I think we can all relate. At some point, we've said yes to too many things and too many times, and something's flaring up of this work is hard and we have to make really hard decisions about something we've been doing for a while. And I mean, I've made those hard decisions recently. All of it was just really relatable, and I appreciate it. Thank you for
Yeah, you're
sharing.
welcome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that because I think, it's too often that we go through it, especially when it's really hard, that we're not thinking about how relatable it is, right? Or how other people may be experiencing the same thing. And, I think that the interesting thing about ADHD too is like that there are a lot of things that we go through in life that have similar symptoms, right? So even if you're not sort of dealing with a lot of the things that I've been talking about because of a neurodivergence, you still may be going through it just because of perimenopause is a huge one. I think that happens to women. I think that when women go through pregnancy, they go through it a lot, right? Because your body is hormonally giving you lots of different stuff at different times throughout
Mhm.
your trimesters, and or even just sort of having a low vibration period where you're feeling bummed out or
Yes.
having a hard time with the self criticism or not giving yourself enough self care. The conversations with ourselves about our own self worth is something that a lot of people deal with because the society unfortunately doesn't is still learning about how to empower people over how to coax people or encourage people to be and do better. It's sort of like showing people how and then expecting them to do it and without the empowerment part, without
Yep.
sort of recognizing that validation through the process is very important because mistakes feel ucky. And if we're not
Mhm.
being encouraged through the mistakes, then we will start to feel like mistakes we make are essentially a reflection of our self-worth, right? When really the willingness and the courage to make mistakes is really should be contributing to our good self-worth, right? And our character. So I think the self-worth thing is a huge piece that I know probably a lot of people deal with. And, being a contractor or a sole proprietor or even starting our own business, which a lot of those of us in improv are, you've done it to yourself. So I'm sure you've gone through this piece as well, is like trying to define your worth and all of that. And as an
Uh-huh.
artist doing arts and soul centered type stuff, healing arts sort of things, or communication benefits like we do for applied improv, like that stuff is so easily cast aside as being, like we as artists unfortunately do have to go a period of time where we're doing it for free as we find our voice, and then that
Yeah.
that period sometimes bleeds into our career, and we have trouble sort of identifying when we should be making that change and then standing up against that change. No, I'm worth money now. uh,
Exactly. I'm only gonna take one pro bono thing a year instead of,
right,
like, one a month or
right,
something.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like, getting yourself to the point where you're able to really evaluate your return on investment, your ROI, right? Like, how much am
Yes.
I putting in and how much is that worth to me? I think that we all come to a point where we recognize that our time is worth money because we could be spending it doing other things, right? And I think that sort of establishing the dollar amount wasn't as difficult as implementing it, right? Because in applied improvisation for me is where I've had the biggest chance to establish that because a lot of my other gigs are contracted. So like with applied improv is contracted too, but people ask for estimates, right? So you're giving quotes and estimates a lot. And I think that when I first started like charging a lot for these, there was a lot of anxiety about the events themselves because it's got a dollar tag on it, right? You know that you've
Yeah.
set it to be worth this much. And we can put a lot of weight on what that's supposed to look like, And I've definitely had enough consistency now with my applied improvisation to know that I can give the client what they want. But
Mhm.
when it's priced below its value, you can sort of take the heat off because you're like, well, I don't have to produce my best value. If it falls short, it's no problem, right? It's because I valued it at the falling short amount, right? But when you go to the high value amount, then it's like, oh God, I've got to bring it the best I possibly can because I can't have this client thinking that I wasn't worth the money. Like there's sort of this internal
Just
voice that's like, oh,
a
you
lot
can't
of pressure.
possibly, yeah, you possibly can't handle being thought of as being less than your value. So yeah, and that just takes a period of discomfort, and we often say, and especially with med improv and acting, we say this all the time. It's the art of being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And I think that with med improv, we use that same language because it's very uncomfortable to be doing that practice when you really want to just be in your books and studying for your next test, right? And the art of being uncomfortable is such a value in everything that we do because clearly we cannot escape being uncomfortable. And if we do escape being uncomfortable, we end up being, I mean, there's so many words that come into my mind, but I don't want to use them. Complacent in our own life, I suppose. And sort of where I found myself that summer of 2017, where I wasn't really living.
Mhm.
I wasn't really feeling all of the benefits of living here on earth, of finding the joy and good times as well as sort of feeling the bad things. And I think like after that trip, I developed a sense of comfortability with vulnerability because I wanted to find that feeling of living and being sad and being vulnerable, and sharing my truth, which are hard things to speak
Mhm.
to, right? And interesting enough, in doing that, I got a lot of mixed responses. Like most people in my life have been very positive and very supportive of it, but some folks I think who are maybe just not comfortable having those conversations were
Interesting.
reacting sort of the
Yeah.
same way that I got, or a lot of the same reactions that I got when I was younger, which was sort of laughing at it, laughing it off, minimizing it, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, in fact, going back to the question about leadership as being an ADHD or being a highly sensitive person, separate from ADHD even is, you get told a lot that there's no room for emotion in leadership, right? You can't be leading from emotion.
Oh,
And
right,
I
right.
took that to heart and I sort of, because I was actually experiencing a lot of situations where I was being vulnerable to what I wanted and needed and how I felt, and it was getting ignored or glossed over or thrown back at me and used in a negative way. And I kept sort of saying, why does this keep happening? And so the result was you can't lead with emotion. You're at a higher level now. You've got to take your emotion out of it. And so I did. And in fact, by doing that, I sort of also took emotion. I sort of denied myself that opportunity to be an empath and to celebrate what that meant and the benefits
Mhm.
and the gifts that it gave me as a human being. And I think that that contributed to a lot of my downfall as I was sort of sliding into the depression because my truth and authentic nature, my divine identity is another way to refer to it, is about being okay sharing the most vulnerable parts of my life, right? And when
Revenue.
I stopped doing it and sort of kept it all to myself, it all transferred into my nervous system, right? And it lived there, right?
Revenue.
And so I think that when I kind of came to the conclusion of no, that wasn't right, sort of looking back at it in retrospect, being able to say, no, that's not right for you. That doesn't work for you. So if I was getting negative responses to it, then that's the piece I need to unlock. It's not necessarily about what I was communicating or what I was choosing to communicate. It might have just been how I was doing it or when I was doing it and figuring out, how to navigate that component. And I think that takes me back to sort of where I'm at now in my life of being medicated now for just 3 months of time and having the vocabulary, having the tools, having other experiences to relate to. I think that's a lot of what's going on is just a lot of relearning how I need and want to be functioning in order to be happy, and figuring out how to communicate that to the people who love me, right? And who want to keep collaborating with me. So it's an interesting
Yeah.
place to find myself.
Well, I was going to ask, you know, we've heard your journey, and you have now had this diagnosis and medication to help. Where do you think you're headed with improv and contract work and gig work, and also just, yeah, being in person? Where do you think you're headed, and where do you want it to head to?
This is a really great question, and one that I'm not ready to answer in life. A lot of my depression issues felt down to sort of the pressure that I was putting on myself to have that answer, and the inability to answer it. And I think at the time I was sort of too sort of inundated with all of the things that I had built that were providing for me, that sort of felt necessary, and the little space that they were making for me to have time to process all of that, right? And a lot of my time spent in therapy over the last year has been like, the therapist coming back around to that question, what do you want? You just have to say what you want. And me being like, I don't know what I want. Right? Because not knowing what you
It
want.
is a lot of pressure too.
And yeah, not knowing how to communicate it can be very scary. It can be very defeatist, because especially when you sort of have lived your whole life sort of understanding or having sort of some sense that there was a purpose for you. This is one thing that I've never been able to let go of, is that there's something that I'm working towards, and I have yet to experience that thing of feeling like, oh, that this was it. This is what I've been working towards, And I think that most of my life I've sort of just used my gut as a divining rod, like just letting it take me, letting the opportunities that present themselves to me sort of guide me. And so a lot of the questions that I had to go through during that period of time is am I neglecting myself of what I really want by not truly having the courage to stand up and say it? Or am I still figuring it out? And I think there's very few people who say that it's okay not to know what your purpose is or what you want, but some people do say it, and it's very comforting. I think that whatever it is, it's bigger than me, which I think is what makes it hard to say, because it feels utterly ridiculous to say that I want something that's bigger than me. I think impact is the closest word I can come to. Like, I want to make an impact. I know that when I say that out loud, like, the truth is I already have, people tell me
Yes.
that I have. And I think that this last camp season was like the first time that I was like sort of able to like really visualize it, or gave myself the ability to. And they say that ADHD folk, just because we don't have great memories because we're distracted all the time, we often forget all the compliments and only remember all the negative stuff, because those are the things we hold on to improve. And so, yeah, so that's definitely an issue I've had my entire life, sort of leading me up to this point of this last year of having to teach myself how to hold gratitude for myself, right? To hold witness of my impact. And that's been helpful. I know that I have a calling to service, and I know that I have a calling to community building. And I know that ultimately in my soul, I am an artist. So if I take all of those components and I just keep leading with those, I figure, I will just keep doing good things. I care a lot about people. I have a lot of love for people, and I have a lot of love for improv and what it brings to people, the gifts that it gives, and not just to the individuals, but to then their impact on life, right? And I see all of that stuff. And so when I do things that are improv centric and improv oriented, such as managing the camps, I do it with that love. And that's ultimately what carries me through the work, and carries me through the weekends, and carries me on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, right? But as far as what I want and where I'm going, I don't know, because I don't necessarily love when you strip it all back and you strip away the impact, right? You strip away the bigger thing. I don't know what I love. They all seem hard to me. Like every single one of them seems like hard work, but I also think, okay, that's just life. That's what life is going to be. If you are a person who's dedicated to constantly growing and leveling up and be better and better and better, then that's what you're calling for yourself, is to be a constant student of life.
But when you have moments where you can't be, or you're not going at the pace you were used to going, I think is where the struggle and the shoulds come in, and the hard part.
Okay. Yeah. I think that I've found myself to my answer.
Okay.
So I think I want to be a content creator, and I want to be famous for creating that content. That's the component that's very hard to announce, to say out loud. It sounds so
yes, and
arrogant. And so I think that what I want now is I want to find my way to clearing the space that I need for my creative voice to be loud enough to hear. And I think that this is where a lot of the struggle has been, and where a lot of the desperation comes in, is that when you don't make time for yourself to have, and part of the challenges with the ADHD is that as long as there's a task on my calendar, that's going to hold space, right? So if there's a lot of tasks that are focusing on the festival, on Utopia, on building this website here, or setting up this new class here, or marketing this here, those things, as long as they're on my calendar, are going to take up all the space. And what I need to do is I want to make more time that are just Jackie days, that I can clear up the space for the artist within me. A lot of the thing that's been holding me back of being my own artist, or creating content, or going for it, is just not feeling like I understand my voice, like what I want to say. And a lot of that is fear-based, because a lot of things that I want to say, I know are going to ruffle some feathers. They're going to create some debate, and I'm scared of that. I'm scared of upsetting people. I'm scared of people thinking one way about me without knowing the whole me, And so a big thing on my journey ahead is sort of knocking that fear aside, or whittling it down a little bit more, so that I'll start, making more space for me.
I was going to say, is that fear worth holding back the message for those who need to hear it? That fear will hold them back from not hearing it. So yes, you will ruffle some feathers, and you will also help those who need to hear it. And I mean, I'm taking notes right now. I have so many notes. I've got two reflections for what you just said. You mentioned one that you're always looking for that moment of, I've made it, or I've done it. Like this is what all the work was for, and you haven't had that moment. And I feel that in like public speaking and in improv. I was always like, this is going to be the speech where I conquer my fear of public speaking, or I give this best speech of my life, and it's like I've gone upward, and like we're past all that struggle. And same with improv, like this is gonna be the best show, and I'm gonna be a different improviser from here on out. And I've never had those moments, and I've always wanted them. I've craved them, right? And I think the work is done in each small step and increment you take, but it can be hard to see that when you're like looking for that defining moment. So I'm just validating that your defining moment of impact has happened every camp that you have attended, every camp that you've organized, every festival, every show, every applied improv workshop you facilitate. Like the impact has already happened, and just you seeing the defining moment will come. Second point of reflection here, real quick, is you mentioned before that the universe provides, and the universe is serendipitous, and I'm kind of in my feels right now because, I had this whole list of questions, right? I had 20 questions I wanted to ask you. And we ultimately like touched on everything in one way or another. And so it doesn't need to be this question and answer format, but everything you're saying is hitting me so hard right now because I'm in this kind of pivotal moment. Like I've left my job and, yes, we're in different like life stages, but like I'm in this moment too where I'm stepping into this new role and owning my business and going full time and giving it a go. And it's scary. And anyway, I'm having all these feels too. And what you're saying is so relatable, whether it's a diagnosis or a life stage or a life change. I think, again, that's the universe kind of like showing me a mirror and being like, you needed to hear this today. You didn't need the Q&A, the like, what's your favorite improv exercise? We can have a part two and talk like, this was the universe showing me a mirror and being like, you needed to hear this today. So thank you.
Yeah,
for
you're
all of
welcome. Yeah, and just one other comment about going back to us talking about people getting started in teaching or any new thing, right? And uncertainty and that sort of thing, right? Like if we go back and think about even the conversations, things we touched on about it, and then even step back again and think about life, right? Like every transition that we make, the transition you're going through right now is a new beginning for you, which means that it is going to have all of that discomfort. It's going to have all of that uncertainty. It's going to have the mistakes, right? But it is the getting through that helps you level up. And I think, in the Med Improv program that we do out here in Phoenix, we talk about the tolerance of the uncertainty, tolerance of it, right? And so the more and more that we see ourselves leveling up through challenge and going through all of that discomfort, the more tolerance we build up for it and the more willing we are to sort of, walk into the fire, even though we know it's going to maybe be unpleasant in areas. And I think that when we didn't talk about this, but when you had me join you for your conference out here in Phoenix, it was such a great opportunity for me. And, I was nervous about it. I had a little anxiety and I prepared so that I would feel good during it. And it was great the whole time. It was lovely working with you. But it was a scary thing for me because it was my first time stepping out of bringing applied improvisation to these events as improvisation, right? You were bringing implied improvisation to the event as an opportunity to learn more about effective communication. So I think walking away from that was one of those moments that we sort of look for when we're transitioning and we're leveling up of affirmation, right? Of like, okay, you came, you're here, you're trying it, and it feels great. That's affirmation, right? And so going into whatever the next thing is within that realm feels less scary. It feels less hard. You've now got a few new tools to plug into it, And I think that that's the hope and goals is that with every time you step into an unknown, every time you make a transformation, every time you try something brand new, it's going to feel easier and easier. And that's why the folks who do lean into it and who choose to walk into the fear get rewarded immensely, right? There's great rewards. And I think that the cool thing about having a calling, even though, as I just said, it feels unfocused and unclear, the calling really drives you to follow the fear, as they say in our art form, right? The reward is beyond.
Your gut and your intuition is kind of your guiding rod, right? Guiding you towards where you need to be, want to be. And so, following that intuition is so important. And I'm so glad you said yes, Anne, to coming to help me with that presentation. I'll talk a little bit more about it in the outro, but it was such a pleasure working with you. And again, we meant to record this like a month or a few weeks after we held the workshop. And then I just did not have the capacity to be able to sit down and record. And honestly, you know what? I'm so glad we did this today. Like everything happens for a reason. And I think we're in a different and a better place being able to sit down and talk today. And it would have been a different episode, right? So
yeah, 100%. Because that would have been before my journey, which culminated in all this stuff this summer, right? So
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
it would have definitely been a different episode and not even like good or bad, just different, right? But yeah, working with you was such a treat because I got to see your level of communication, your level of organization, your level of time management. I think every time you'd be like, "Hey, we have these exercises, but we only have this amount of time. We need to scrap." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here because
Yeah.
that was my first time back presenting after maternity leave, and Evie was there at the hotel, not at the presentation, but she was there, so I was still kind of like connected, and I was still breastfeeding. It was a lot for me, and having your support to just be like, "Hey, we've got so much time. We need to scrap. We need to do this." Oh, I just it was so magical working with you and having you there. So I'm so glad we got to experience that together. And it was such a good group. We had 22 people.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah, they were very engaged, very into it, lots of discussion. It was great. It was a wonderful experience for me. It was a very big turning point in my learning with applied improvisation because I've never really taken it into that realm of conferences, nor have I really even considered like public speaking with what I'm doing or what I've learned, you know. So yeah, it sort of opened up a lot of new avenues for me in terms of like where I could go, how I could focus.
I asked that question, like, what's ahead? And it's funny because, yeah, we don't know. There's no script for life. We're all making it up as we go. So there's no right or wrong answer. So I'm glad you answered it how you did. And you're like, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I'm figuring it out.
I suppose in more tangible ways, Savi Fest just went through the process of solidifying their business, and it's been a whole thing and all associated with my own mental health and,
Yeah.
this whole process. So it's a big story. But ultimately, we started an LLC as Sonoran Valley Improv, and then we started a nonprofit called Savi Collective, which the nonprofit will ultimately be what features the annual festival. So a lot going on there and a lot to think about and build out in that realm, but it's also still brand new and there's lots of possibilities because of the way that we set up the organization. So I'm sure I'll be focusing a lot of time and attention on that in the years to come as well.
You said there's a lot of possibilities, and you're figuring it out. You've got content to create, you've got people to impact. So where and how can our listeners follow you on this journey as you keep doing that?
Sure, sure. Well, right now I'm just sort of living life and sharing my life just as it
Finding your
is.
voice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
finding my voice. But I have a website. It's JacqueArend.com, and that's spelled JACQUEAREND.com. And that's just sort of more of a scrapbook than anything else right now, but it's a great way to sort of learn a little bit about me and what I've been up to thus far and what I do out there. Also, my Instagram is at Goldtooth, which is tooth spelled with an E at the end. It's an homage to Dr. Teeth from the Muppets and a little bit of an Al Capone obsession is why I have at Goldtooth as my. Additionally, I mostly post most of the stuff that I'm doing, like teaching wise and performance wise, on my Facebook page, which is Jacque Arend, the hashtag Jacque Arend or the backslash, and that's public. So feel free to friend me or
Oh, nice.
that's the best way to sort of keep up with like my performance and my teaching life. Yeah, I would say those are the best places to look at this time.
And you lead Savi Fest and Camp Improv
Oh,
Utopias. We'll link to those too,
yeah,
because
yeah.
you're a huge part of those organizations as
Yeah,
well.
improvutopia.org, azactorsacademy.com, and savvyfest.com are all organizations that I'm heavily involved in. I also started making websites, which is something that I do on the side. And I'd say I'm really good for folks who are nervous about making a website, feeling
Yeah.
intimidated by it, or folks who maybe have an outdated website and just really sort of nervous about making that transition to a more modern look and feel. I'd say like I take a lot of care in understanding you and your wants and needs and give a lot of grace for whatever you need through that process. as well as I need a lot of grace. So it's, because, ADHD. But I found that, that people who find me were like kismet relationships. So if this is resonating with you and you need a new website for anything, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help.
Oh, again, the universe is serendipitous. I created my website in 2022 when I had COVID and I was quarantined, and I just kind of stayed up all night and doing it when I didn't feel bad or anything. And I know it needs a refresh. So I might be reaching out to you for a little bit of consulting maybe on how to
Yeah.
refresh the content a bit.
Awesome. Yeah, happy to
Yeah.
help.
Jackie, I mean, honestly, we could keep
Oof.
talking
Yeah.
and going, and it's kind of like camp, and I'm not able to attend camp right now, just in the life stage that I'm at, but I will be back at camp. I've got East Camp kind of in my mind on the horizon, maybe in a few years. But it feels like we're just sitting outside at camp talking, and we recorded this conversation, and I love that.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really love having the opportunity to be in a space like this where I can talk openly and honestly about how my path has been, because and I appreciate you mentioning that it's really sort of been some relatable stuff for you, because I think that's the ultimate hope, is that what I'm going through, I'm not going through alone, and that other folks out there who it resonates with can know that they're also not alone in it.
You mentioned feeling uncomfortable with the uncomfortable and also the vulnerability. And I think, I mean, we did that, you did that today, and I got to listen and just kind of soak it in. And I just appreciate you being comfortable with the vulnerability today.
Yeah,
And
my
when I
pleasure.
see you next time, I'll give you a big hug, and
Awesome.
I can't wait to have our paths cross again and reconnect. But
Yeah,
we'll stay in touch, and I will always be in your corner cheering you on as you go through this journey.
awesome. Thank you. Best of luck to you with everything that's going on as well.
Oh, thank you so much. All right, big hugs. We'll talk soon. And big hugs to you. Thank you so much for joining us today and listening in. Oh my goodness, what an amazing episode. I'm so appreciative of Jackie for coming on and really embodying the idea and the mindset of being comfortable with being uncomfortable and being comfortable being vulnerable. And she really was today. I could hear it in moments that were hard and challenging, and it's tough to talk about. And I just so appreciate Jackie sharing her journey today. And it's a journey that's not finished, it's a journey that's continuing on. And, I had another guest on a year or two ago, Dr. Jana Hirsch, and she said something I'll always remember, that when we tell the stories of our journey, that we can often make it seem linear and make it all make sense. And, yeah, well, I did this thing and then naturally went to this thing and then did this thing. And of course, it all flowed and it was nice and neat. And rarely is it really nice and neat, especially when we're in the journey and on the journey and still figuring it out. And that is improv at its finest. It really is. We don't have the script for life. And if we did, would we really want to see it? Would we want to know what's going to happen next? And as tempting as it is to have that as an option, I like to think that I would say no. If I was ever asked that question and given that opportunity, I would say no to it. I don't want to know what's coming next. I don't want the script of my life, because that takes the fun out of it. Yes, it takes the uncertainty out of it. And we spent a lot of time talking about the uncertainty, but the uncertainty is what brings about new discoveries and new explorations. And if we know what's going to happen next, then is it even fun anymore? Is it even challenging? Does it help us grow? So, anyway, life things to think about. But I am in awe of Jackie just being so present and vulnerable today and speaking her truth and starting this journey as someone who speaks their truth and is a creative and a content creator. I mean, it's coming, it's happening. She's already impacted so many people, me included. Just the amount of love I have for Camp Improv Utopia is huge. I mean, it's really been a huge part of my journey, going to camp and experiencing camp and the workshops and the people have been so impactful for me. And I will always be grateful for Jacque and Nick and the whole team at Camp Improv Utopia for all that they've done. I want to share a little bit of behind the scenes or background on what Jacque and I were talking about. We didn't get to really dive into it today, but Jacque and I got to connect end of March, early April 2025. We got the chance to work together at the Art and Science of Health Promotion Conference, which was held in Scottsdale, Arizona this year. And how that came about is my friend and co-presenter, Jesse Greenfield, they've been on the podcast twice now. We usually debrief our workshops and sessions at the Art and Science of Health Promotion Conference. They weren't able to attend the session. Like, we submitted a proposal, it got accepted, we were all excited for it. And when we submitted the proposal in July 2024, I told Jesse, I was like, hey, I'm pregnant. Like, this baby's coming anytime. And Evie came end of July 2024. It's like, I do not know what life is going to look like in March and April 2025 when the conference is, but let's put both of our names on it. But you might be the one that goes, and I may have to say no. And it ended up playing out that Jesse wasn't able to attend for health issues and things that came up. And I had to make the decision, like, can I do this on my own? Can I attend? Can I make this work? And it was a lot. I had to take the whole family with me. My husband came, Evie came, my parents came to help with Evie during the day in the hotel room. It was a whole road trip. It was Evie's first long road trip. It was a 6-hour road trip with a baby, turns into about 8 or 9-hour road trip. I mean, it was just a lot. And when I was talking to the conference organizers about the situation, they mentioned, well, if you know someone who could help you facilitate or something, like, feel free to add a facilitator to it. And I was like, okay, who does improv in Arizona? And Jacque came to mind first. I was like, I think Jackie's in Arizona. And I only knew Jacque in the capacity of organizing all the improv camps. I would say hello in passing. Obviously, like, she knew me through all, like, the admin work and me signing up and being there multiple times, but I never really get to talk to Jacque at camp because she's so busy. But I emailed her and I said, here's the scenario, here's, what it pays, here's what it is. And I asked, can you do the opportunity, or do you know someone who could take this on or who would want to take it on? And she came back and she's like, I'm in, I want to do this. Let's do this together. And I was so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, I get to work with Jacque. Again, I've only seen her at camp, like, in this huge role, and she's always really busy. And so I'm like, oh, yay. And I didn't even know that Jacque had all this applied improv facilitation experience. I knew she was an experienced improviser. I knew she taught. I knew she led camp, but I didn't even know she had the huge applied improv work behind her. And so it was such an amazing experience. We met about a month out talking about all the exercises and kind of organizing what we were going to do, getting our plan in place, which then ultimately didn't get scrapped, but it got changed and it was flexible and fluid on the days of the conference. But it was, again, such a treat to be able to learn from Jacque, learn different exercises that she does, how she organizes her trainings. Our 2-day training was called Essential Skills for Effective Facilitation. It was 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Monday and Tuesday, the first 2 days of the conference. They were like pre-conference intensives. And for whatever reason, we ended up being the only intensive that was held. And so we got some people who had tried to sign up for other intensives. We were planning for 16 people, and we ended up with like 22 to 24. I can't remember the final count, but it was over 20, and it was kind of more than we were expecting in terms of like group breakouts. But we're improvisers. We handled it just fine. And I've talked about this in my solo episode, so I won't say a ton about it, but I'll just say that that experience of leading that 2-day workshop and having Jackie's help was so monumental in my journey as a speaker mom and someone who has their speaking business and trying to get back into it from maternity leave. This was my first speaking engagement. This was my first conference after baby. This was my first major conference, like having the whole family there. I put a lot of time and work and energy into it. When Jesse said that they couldn't attend, it hit me that yes, we had an outline and plan in place, but we hadn't worked on the full presentation and what we were actually going to do. And so I had to put it together myself, which I am a professional. I can do that. Again, I knew what we wanted to do, but taking the time to put all the slides together, I ended up having over 150 slides, and we did not get through all the slides, which is crazy. Like, it was a 2-day workshop, but all the discussion and feedback and just like the amazing energy we got through what we needed to get through in the presentation. So I wasn't worried about it. And they got the slides for later. But I had to work on those slides after Evie went to bed. And so I would be up working on those slides till 2 or 3 in the morning sometimes. And I will say I kind of burned out because it took a long time. It took weeks to put that presentation together and like weeks of staying up late. And I was very tired just from the conference prep and attending the conference. And it was a lot of low sleep nights. I was still breastfeeding at that point, and Evie was having some low sleep nights, a lot of co-sleeping in the bed, which I never sleep very well when she's in the bed with me. She never sleeps that well either. Again, this is all behind the scenes, but when we were driving to the conference, or supposed to go to the conference, Evie was sick and she wasn't feeling well. She had a fever. That Friday night, as I was packing and stuff, my husband was like, should we go to this conference? And I was supposed to speak that Monday. And I remember having this choice of like, am I putting my work before my family? Like, am I risking my child's health before my family? And, I told him, I was like, we've already committed to this. Like, I'm the main presenter. Yes, I have Jackie to help, but I'm like the main presenter in this. Like, I need to be there. And she ended up having to go to urgent care. And she was okay. I don't think there was any medicine to give. She just had a fever, maybe a cough. And my husband wasn't feeling well. And it was such a tough time. Like, I'm really struggling to talk about it because it was a really tough time. And we pushed through. I say we pushed through, which is kind of a sign that like I forced it, but I'm glad that I pushed through. I'm glad that we had the session. I'm glad we did it. I'm glad I was comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it was a really uncertain time of like, will we even make it to this conference? Like, is this going to actually happen? And it did. And I'm so glad. And Jackie and I were reflecting after we hit the stop button, and we were kind of chatting about like just the difference that a few months have made, and how this really is a different episode than if we kind of forced recording it in May. It would have been a great episode as well. We would have chatted about the session a lot more. It would have been fresh in our minds. We would have talked all about applied improv. I mean, it would have been a great episode, and it just would have been different. And so, the past few months have been a lot for both of us. and Jackie's going through some changes and times of uncertainty. I have a whole 45-minute episode on uncertainty and over the past 2.5 years or 3 years, and how it's affected me and how it is my friends, but it's taken a while to get there. And so it's been some really uncertain times, but we are making it through. And I'm grateful to just have this episode today in our authentic forms and selves. Like, we've shown up today, and this is the result of showing up today. And this is the episode that came up. And, we talked a lot about that in our training as facilitators, that there's so much uncertainty being a facilitator. You can plan and prep and do all of the details ahead of time, and then you end up spending an hour talking about this thing that you plan to spend 15 minutes on, and then you adjust and you just move on and you say, that conversation is what needed to happen. That conversation is what came up because it was supposed to come up. But if you are very regimented and you're like kind of forcing the agenda, you might skip some really relatable points for people, and they might not have the discoveries or the takeaways in the same way. And so that's a really important lesson as a speaker, facilitator, improviser. It never goes the way you plan, and that's okay. And that's actually a great thing, because what comes up, the actual product or result, is better than you could have imagined it going. And if you force it, yes, you get a product that you can be proud of. That's great as well. But if you plan and then let it flow, it comes out differently, and it is better and different and more relatable, more experiential than you could have imagined. And that's what today was too. I had a whole list of questions for Jackie. We'll do a part 2 at some point. We'll get those questions answered, but in all reality, they were answered in some way, shape, or form. Jackie did an amazing job sharing her story, being vulnerable, being her authentic self. And I want to ask you, the theme of this episode is being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Is there something that you're feeling uncomfortable doing, but it feels right to keep doing it? We talked about taking all those little steps, and every time you do it, it gets a little easier and it gets a little bit better. So are you saying no to something out of fear? Or are you saying no to something out of a boundary? If it's a boundary and it's no, that's great. But if it's out of fear, that's time to reflect and take note and see what changes can be made. And how can you get more comfortable with being uncomfortable? Improv helps, public speaking helps, sharing your story helps, healing arts, theater, being creative, all of it helps you to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And what can you do to help with that? And I want to hear from you. If anything came up today that resonates, maybe a mirror was reflected to you too, something's going on, you're like, oh my gosh, this is exactly it. The universe is serendipitous. I needed to hear this today. Please feel free to reach out. It always helps to share with somebody. You never have to go at it alone. So please feel free to email me. My email is dana@improvispeaking.com. That's DAYNA at improvly, it's improv speaking.com. You can also reach out to me on social media. On Instagram, I'm at improvispeaking. On LinkedIn, I'm at Dana Gowan. And then my website, which does need a refresh, and maybe Jackie can help, is improvispeaking.com. All right. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining. Thanks for being you. Thanks for showing up today and being your authentic self. I truly appreciate the support, and I'm so grateful that you're here. Thanks for listening and supporting Improv Speaking. And here's your friendly reminder to say yes and go out and flex your creative thinking. I'll talk to you next time.